welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Day 1. The concrete bled ichor through the sidewalk cracks. I'm Carter Bisson, and I need to document what I found before it's too late. The emergency alert started 3 hours ago. Mindless creatures ravaging downtown LA, but I've been tracking the signs for weeks. My grandfather's journals, the ones everyone called folklore nonsense, they're all coming true. The first bleeding sigil appeared outside the Bradbury Building on Broadway. I was there for routine archaeological documentation when the concrete began weeping. Not water, not sewage, thick, dark ichor that seared the air with copper and sulfur. The substance pooled in geometric patterns, following lines carved so deep into the foundation that they'd been invisible until now. I pressed my palm against the warm concrete. The building's facade shuddered, and through the stone I felt something massive stirring beneath. The carved lines pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat, and each pulse sent tremors through my bones. Grandfather's ward documentation suddenly made sense. The protective sigils he'd sketched in his cramped handwriting, the warnings about concrete altars and urban summoning arrays. I dismissed them as an old man's paranoia, but here, kneeling in a pool of bleeding stone, I understood. Los Angeles wasn't just built on fault lines. It was built on something far worse. The ichor burned my skin where it touched, leaving angry red welts that throbbed with each heartbeat from below. I pulled out my phone to photograph the sigil, but the device sparked and died the moment I aimed it at the bleeding concrete. The air itself seemed to reject documentation, crackling with static electricity that made my hair stand on end. I stumbled backward as the carved lines began to glow beneath the ichor. The light was wrong. Not electric white or warm yellow, but the sickly green of infected wounds. The building groaned, and chunks of concrete rained down from the upper floors. Through the growing cracks, I saw more sigils, an entire network of ritual markings threaded through the building's foundation like veins. The tremors intensified, windows shattered in sequence, cascading glass that caught the unnatural light and scattered it across the street in emerald fragments. The bleeding concrete spread, following the carved channels toward the storm drains. Where it touched the metal grates, they began to corrode, edges curling and dissolving like paper in acid. I ran. 3 blocks away, I found another bleeding sigil outside the $1 Million Theater. Same pattern, same searing ichor, same wrongness that made my teeth ache. But this one was larger, more complex, with additional symbols carved in spirals around the central design. The concrete here didn't just bleed. It bubbled, releasing noxious steam that smelled of burnt flesh and rotting eggs. My grandfather's warnings echoed in my mind. The city feeds the ritual, boy. Every building, every street, every foundation stone. They're all part of the array. I thought he was losing his mind in those final months. Now I realized he'd been trying to save it. I pulled his journal from my jacket, pages yellowed and brittle with age. His sketches matched what I was seeing. The geometric patterns, the way the sigils connected through underground channels, the descriptions of concrete altars bleeding for the awakening. But his notes mentioned something else. Protective wards, counter sigils that could disrupt the ritual if activated in time. The bleeding concrete reached the storm drain. The metal grate dissolved completely, revealing a dark opening that exhaled humid air thick with the stench of decay. From deep below came a sound like grinding stone mixed with animal breathing. Something was moving down there, something large enough to make the street vibrate with each shifting movement. My phone buzzed. A text from Xavier, my research partner. Carter, where are you? The whole downtown core is going insane. Buildings are shaking, and there's some kind of chemical spill everywhere. Are you seeing this? I typed back with shaking fingers. Not chemical. Ritual. Meet me at the office. Bring grandfather's ward blueprints from the archive. Everything he documented about protective sigils. The response came immediately. You're scaring me. What ritual? Before I could answer, the street beneath my feet cracked. A fissure split the asphalt in a perfectly straight line, running from the theater toward the financial district. The crack glowed with the same sick green light, and from its depths rose the sound of something vast awakening. The emergency alert on my phone updated. Seek immediate shelter. Unknown biological hazard spreading through downtown core. Avoid all contact with affected areas. But they didn't understand. This wasn't biological. This was something older, something that had been waiting beneath the city for decades, fed by every foundation poured, every building erected, every street laid down in precise geometric patterns that formed a massive summoning array. I ran toward my office, grandfather's journal clutched against my chest. The bleeding concrete followed me, spreading through the network of carved channels like infection through veins. Behind me, the fissure widened, and something that shouldn't exist began to climb toward the surface. The ritual had begun, and I was the only one who knew how to stop it. If I could find the courage to try. The concrete bled ichor through every crack now, and in the distance I could hear the first screams. Day 2. The asphalt roared with bleeding concrete. Xavier was waiting in my office when I arrived. Grandfather's archive boxes scattered across every surface. His face was pale, streaked with dust from the collapsing buildings outside. Carter, what the hell is happening out there? The entire financial district is. The floor beneath us bucked like a living thing. My desk lamp crashed to the ground as a fissure split the hardwood, glowing with that same sick green light. Through the crack, we could hear something massive moving in the spaces between buildings, scraping against concrete foundations with sounds like grinding bone. The ritual, I gasped, spreading grandfather's ward blueprints across the trembling desk. It's not just bleeding anymore. It's awakening. Xavier stared at the yellowed papers, his hands shaking as he traced the intricate protective sigils. These symbols, Carter, I've seen these before. Last month, when I was surveying the subway expansion. They're carved into the tunnel walls, hundreds of them, all connected by channels that we thought were just drainage. The building shuddered again. Through the window, I watched the street split open in a perfect grid pattern, each crack following the buried sigil network. The bleeding concrete wasn't just seeping now, it was gushing, founaining up through the fissures like arterial blood. The air filled with that copper-sulfur stench, so thick it coated our throats and made breathing an effort. We have to warn someone, I said, reaching for my phone. The police, the mayor, anyone who'll listen. But Xavier grabbed my wrist. Who's going to believe this? Hello, 911, the concrete is bleeding and summoning monsters? They'll think we're having a breakdown. A scream echoed from the street below. Through the window, I saw a woman running from Grand Central Market, her clothes torn and smoking. Behind her, the asphalt itself was moving, rippling like liquid as something pushed up from underneath. The pavement bulged higher, concrete chunks falling away to reveal a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. Scales the size of manhole covers, glistening with ichor. Jesus Christ, Xavier whispered. There's actually something down there. The creature, if that's what it was, settled back into the depths with a sound like a building collapse. But the damage was done. The street remained split, bleeding concrete pooling in the gutters. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but they were moving away from downtown, not toward it. I spread out grandfather's master ward diagram, the one he'd labeled Urban Protection Array Los Angeles 1987. The protective sigils formed a complex pattern that mirrored the city's layout, with key anchor points at major intersections and landmarks. But many of the locations were marked with red X's and notes like Foundation Compromised and Sigil Corrupted. He knew, I said, running my finger along the faded ink. Grandfather knew they were building something. Look at the dates. Every major construction project from the 1980s onward, he documented how they were corrupting his protective wards. Xavier leaned over the diagram. These anchor points, the ones that aren't marked compromised, do you think they still work? Before I could answer, the building across the street began to bleed. Not from the foundation this time, from every floor, every window, every surface. The concrete facade wept ichor in rivulets that traced geometric patterns down the walls. The patterns pulsed with that sick green light, and where they intersected, the building structure began to soften and warp. The ritual's accelerating, I said. Whatever they're summoning, it's almost ready to emerge. Xavier grabbed the ward blueprints and stuffed them into his backpack. Then we need to activate the anchors. How many are left? I counted the unmarked locations on Grandfather's map. 7. Scattered across the city, from Griffith Observatory to the ports. But Xavier, we don't know if this will work. These wards were designed to contain something, not banish it. Then we contain it until we figure out how to banish it. He shouldered his pack and headed for the door. I'll take the northern anchors, Observatory, Hollywood Bowl, UCLA. You take the southern ones. Wait, I caught his arm. This isn't just about activating sigils. Look at Grandfather's notes. Each anchor requires a blood sacrifice to power the ward. That's why he marked them as compromised. Whoever's running this ritual, they've been feeding it for decades. Xavier's face went white. Blood sacrifice? Carter, you're talking about. The floor exploded upward. Concrete chunks flew across the room as something massive punched through from below. Appendage. I couldn't call it an arm or tentacle, it was both and neither, emerged from the hole. The surface was covered in those same geometric patterns. But these were living sigils, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Where the appendage touched the walls, the concrete began to bleed and soften. We ran. The stairwell was chaos. Other tenants fled past us, some screaming, others silent with shock. The building's elevator shaft had become a vertical fissure, glowing green light rising from depths that seemed to extend far below the actual foundation. The air shimmered with heat and toxic fumes. On the third floor, the creature's appendage burst through the wall beside us. Up close, I could see it wasn't entirely organic. Metal cables and rebar were fused with the scaled flesh, as if the thing had absorbed the building's infrastructure and made it part of itself. The living sigils pulsed faster, and the surrounding concrete began to bubble and run like wax. The parking garage, Xavier shouted over the grinding roar. If we can get to the car. The building tilted, not collapsed, tilted, as if something beneath was pushing it off its foundation. Through the stairwell windows, I saw the entire block doing the same thing. Buildings swaying like trees in a hurricane, their foundations compromised by the spreading network of bleeding concrete. We reached the garage as the first creature fully emerged. It rose from the central plaza like a living building, its body a fusion of concrete, steel, and scales. The geometric patterns covered every surface, pulsing with light that made the air itself burn. Where it touched other structures, they began to merge with its mass, adding their concrete and steel to its growing bulk. The wards? I gasped, fumbling for the car keys. If we can activate even a few anchor points, maybe we can slow it down. But as I looked at Grandfather's map, I realized the true horror. The creature wasn't just using the summoning array, it was the array. Every building, every street, every foundation had been designed to eventually merge into this abomination. The entire city was one massive ritual site, and we were watching it come alive. Xavier grabbed my shoulder. Carter, we need to choose. Do we try to save the city, or do we run? Through the garage entrance, I could see more creatures emerging from fissures across downtown. The concrete bled faster now, flowing like rivers toward the central plaza where the largest abomination continued to grow. Emergency broadcasts crackled from abandoned cars. Evacuation mandatory. Unknown seismic activity. Avoid all contact. I looked at Grandfather's ward diagram, at the 7 anchor points that might still work. 7 chances to contain something that had been decades in the making. We activate the wards, I said, even if it kills us.
Xavier nudda grimly.
Then we split up, cover more ground. As we drove out of the collapsing garage, I made a choice that would haunt me. I handed Xavier the most dangerous anchor points, the ones closest to the emerging creatures, the ones that would require him to get close enough to bleed on ancient stone while monsters made of living concrete hunted him through the ruins of our city. The asphalt roared beneath our tires as we separated, heading toward anchor points that might save Los Angeles or might just be elaborate graves. Behind us, the creatures' roars echoed off the bleeding buildings, and I knew we were running out of time. Day 3, the corporation's sigils woke the concrete beasts. I found the first corporate artifact in the ruins of the Wilshire Grand Center. The building had partially merged with one of the creatures, its glass facade now pulsing with organic light, but the executive floors remained intact, accessible if you were stupid enough to climb through a structure that bled ichor from every surface. Xavier and I had activated 2 anchor points before dawn, the observatory and the ports. The protective wards had slowed the creature's spread, containing them to roughly a 12-block radius of downtown. But containment wasn't victory. The things were still growing, still absorbing more concrete and steel with each passing hour. That's when Detective Declan Fortier found me. "You're Carter Bisson," he said, stepping through the rubble of what used to be 7th Street. His LAPD uniform was torn and stained with concrete dust, his face grim with the exhaustion of a man who'd spent 3 days trying to evacuate a city that refused to believe what it was seeing. "I've been looking for you." I turned from the bleeding wall I'd been studying, grandfather's journal still clutched in my hands. "If you're here to arrest me for trespassing, I'm here because your research partner called in a tip before he disappeared." Fortier held up his radio, static crackling through emergency frequencies.
Xavier Ola.
Said you two were the only ones who understood what was happening. Said you had some kind of protective knowledge. The wall beside us pulsed with green light, and a section of concrete cracked away to reveal more of those living sigils. But these were different, cleaner, more geometric, with corporate logos carved into the ritualistic patterns. Meridian Development Corporation, the same company that had built half of downtown's newest structures.
Xavier disappearat.
My stomach dropped. When? Where? UCLA campus, around 0400 hours. We found his car outside the engineering building, doors open, your research materials scattered everywhere. But no body, no blood. Just. Fortier gestured at the glowing crack in the wall. More of this. I pressed my palm against the corporate sigil, feeling the familiar heartbeat rhythm beneath the stone. But this pulse was different, controlled, engineered. These weren't ancient ritual markings. They were modern additions, precision cut with industrial tools and activated by something far more sophisticated than blood sacrifice. "They've been planning this for years," I said, pulling out grandfather's urban protection diagram. "Look at the construction dates. Every major building project since the 1980s, they've been systematically corrupting the protective wards and replacing them with summoning arrays." Fortier studied the yellowed paper, his cop's instincts clearly struggling with the supernatural evidence. "So you're telling me a construction company has been, what, summoning monsters through building permits?" Before I could answer, the building shuddered. Through the cracked windows, we watched another creature emerge from the convention center. This one was smaller than the others, but more refined, its concrete shell inscribed with corporate logos and geometric patterns that pulsed in perfect synchronization. It wasn't just a mindless beast, it was a product. "That's when I knew we needed inside information," I said, pointing to the creature's branded surface. "Someone who understood how they were controlling the ritual." That's when Aiden Labrec found us. He appeared in the building's lobby like a ghost, pale, shaking, wearing a Meridian Development jacket that was torn and stained with ichor. His eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much, understood too much, and was drowning in the guilt of it. "You're the archaeologist," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The one with the old man's journals. I heard your partner broadcasting on the emergency frequencies before they got him. Fortier's hand went to his service weapon. Before who got him? The integration teams. Aiden's laugh was bitter, broken. That's what we called them. The cleanup crews. When someone got too close to the truth, when they started asking questions about the construction specifications or the foundation depth requirements, the integration teams would handle it. I felt sick. Xavier knew about the corporate connection. He must have figured out. He activated the UCLA anchor point. Aiden interrupted. I was monitoring the ritual network from the control room. The ward disrupted our northwestern array, caused a cascade failure that set the project back by hours. So they sent a team to recruit him. The building groaned around us, and more concrete cracked away from the walls. Through the gaps, I could see the creature's flesh. Not organic tissue, but a fusion of concrete, steel, and something else. Computer circuits, fiber optic cables, the integration of technology and ritual that turned summoning into manufacturing. You worked for them, Fortier said, his weapon now drawn. You helped build these things. I helped design the integration protocols, Aiden admitted. The process that merges human consciousness with the concrete matrix. I thought we were developing new construction materials, revolutionary building techniques. I didn't know we were creating vessels for something ancient and hungry. He pulled a tablet from his jacket, the screen showing a complex diagram that made my blood run cold. It was grandfather's protective ward system, but inverted. Every anchor point had been identified, every protective sigil mapped and marked for corruption. The corporation hadn't just been building monsters, they'd been systematically dismantling the one thing that could stop them. How many anchor points are left? I asked. Aiden's fingers flew across the tablet. 3. Maybe 4 if your partner managed to activate the Hollywood Bowl before they got him. But it doesn't matter. Tomorrow night, they're activating the Master Integration Protocol. Every creature, every building, every corrupted foundation. It all merges into one massive entity. Why? Fortier demanded. What's the point of destroying the city? Not destroying, Aiden said. Transforming. The creatures aren't the end goal, they're the infrastructure. Once the master integration is complete, Los Angeles becomes a living city. Every building conscious, every street aware, every citizen integrated. The tablet screen flickered, showing surveillance footage from around the city. I watched in horror as rescue teams entered the contaminated zones, only to be absorbed by the bleeding concrete. Their bodies dissolved, but their consciousness remained, trapped in the stone matrix that pulsed with unnatural life.
Xavier, iwisparat.
Is he integrated? Aiden confirmed. But early stage. If we can disrupt the master protocol before tomorrow night, we might be able to reverse the process. Free the absorbed consciousness before they become permanent parts of the city entity. Fortier holstered his weapon. What do we need to do? Destroy the control center, Aiden said. It's in the Meridian Tower, top floor. The building's core is actually a massive ritual focus, channeling energy from every corrupted foundation in the city. If we can overload it, the whole network collapses, I finished. But what about the remaining anchor points? The protective wards. There's one more thing, Aiden said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The integration teams, they've been hunting anyone with knowledge of the old protective rituals. Your grandfather's journals, the ward blueprints, the blood sacrifice protocols. They need to eliminate all of it before the master integration. He showed us the tablet screen again. Security footage from my office, from Xavier's apartment, from the observatory where we'd activated the first anchor point. Teams of figures in Meridian development jackets, moving through the city with purpose and coordination. They're not just after the anchor points, I realized. They're after us. The building shuddered again, and through the windows, I could see the creatures moving with new purpose. Not random destruction now, but coordinated hunting. The integration teams weren't just human. They were supported by the living buildings themselves, guided by the consciousness trapped in the concrete matrix. "We need to move," Fortier said. "If they're tracking us." The elevator shaft exploded. Concrete and steel fragments filled the air as something massive punched through from below. But this wasn't one of the mindless creatures we'd seen before. This was humanoid, shaped like a person but made of living concrete inscribed with corporate logos. It moved with intelligence, purpose, and when it spoke, the voice came from speakers embedded in its chest. "Carter Bisson," it said in Xavier's voice, "please don't run. The integration process is almost complete. Soon we can be together again." I grabbed grandfather's journal and ran for the stairs. Behind me, Fortier and Aiden followed, but I could hear the Xavier thing pursuing us, its concrete footsteps cracking the floor with each step. "The control center," I shouted over the noise. "If we can destroy it." "It's too late for that," Aiden replied. "But there's one more option. Your grandfather's final protocol. The one he never finished." "What protocol?" "The Urban Apocalypse Ward. It's in his journal, the pages you thought were just rambling. It's designed to sever the connection between the ancient entity and the modern summoning array. But it requires blood sacrifice," I finished. "I know." We reached the street as the Meridian Tower's lights began to pulse in rhythm with the creature's sigils. The master integration protocol was beginning, and we had maybe 6 hours before Los Angeles became something that had never existed before, a living city with an ancient, hungry consciousness. "The sacrifices," I said, watching the tower's hypnotic pulse. "It's not just blood they need. It's willing sacrifice. People who understand what they're giving up." Fortier nodded grimly. "Then we better make sure our sacrifice counts." Above us, the Xavier thing emerged from the building, its concrete face a perfect replica of my friend's features. It smiled with carved lips and spoke with his voice, but its eyes glowed with the same green light as the ritual sigils. "Carter," it called, "you can't stop the integration. The city wants to be whole. Let us make you whole too." I looked at grandfather's journal, at the final protocol he'd never had the courage to complete. The Urban Apocalypse Ward. A ritual designed to turn the summoning array against itself, to make the ancient entity's power destroy the very infrastructure it had corrupted. But the cost was everything. "Everyone, tomorrow night," I said, "we end this." The concrete beasts roared their approval, and the living city pulsed with anticipation. Day 4. The ritual drowned downtown in concrete ichor. I woke at 0400 hours in what used to be MacArthur Park. Grandfather's journal pressed against my chest like a shield. The grass had turned to concrete overnight, but it still rustled in the wind, a sound like grinding stone that made my teeth ache. Around me, the protective ward I'd carved into the park's central fountain glowed with fading light. It had held through the night, but barely. Declan Fortier sat watch beside the fountain, his service weapon trained on the tree line where concrete oaks swayed with unnatural motion. The integration teams had found us twice during the night, but the ward had masked our exact location. They knew we were here. They just couldn't pinpoint where. "Status report," I said, checking grandfather's pocket watch. 6 hours until the master integration protocol reached critical phase. "Bad," Fortier replied. "Emergency broadcasts stopped 3 hours ago. Cell towers are down citywide. And the creatures." He gestured toward downtown, where the skyline had transformed into something alien and organic. "They're not separate entities anymore. They're becoming one massive organism." Through the concrete trees, I could see the truth of his words. The creatures had begun merging, their bodies flowing together like living concrete, forming bridges between buildings, filling streets with pulsing flesh that incorporated cars, streetlights, and everything else in their path. Downtown Los Angeles was becoming a single, integrated entity. "Where's Aiden?" I asked, scouting the Meridian Tower. "He should be back." The fountain's ward flared, and Aiden Lebrecq materialized through the protective barrier. His Meridian jacket was gone, replaced by a torn shirt that revealed scratches across his arms. Not wounds from claws or debris, precise cuts that formed geometric patterns. Self-inflicted ritual scarification. The control center is active, he said, collapsing beside us. The integration protocol is ahead of schedule. They're not waiting for tonight. They're starting now. As if summoned by his words, the concrete ground beneath us began to vibrate. Not an earthquake, but something rhythmic, purposeful. A heartbeat that came from the city itself, pulsing through every foundation, every corrupted ward, every integrated consciousness trapped in the stone matrix. How long do we have? I asked. Maybe 2 hours before the merge becomes irreversible, Aiden said. But there's something else. The integration teams found your partner's anchor point at UCLA. They're using his knowledge to corrupt the remaining protective wards. I felt sick. Xavier hadn't just been absorbed. He'd been turned into a weapon against everything we'd worked to protect. His understanding of grandfather's ward system, his knowledge of the anchor points, all of it was now serving the entity that had consumed him. Can we still reach the control center? Fortier asked. That's the problem, Aiden replied. The Meridian Tower isn't just a building anymore. It's the heart of the integrated organism. Getting inside means walking through living concrete that recognizes our faces, our voices, our intentions. It knows we're coming. The heartbeat grew stronger, and I watched in horror as the concrete grass around us began to pulse with green light. The protective ward was failing, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the integration protocol. Then we don't try to sneak in, I said, opening grandfather's journal to the final protocol. We go loud. The urban apocalypse ward was written in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and something older that predated both. The instructions were clear. Identify the 7 integration nodes, overload them simultaneously, and channel the feedback through a willing sacrifice positioned at the ritual center. The subway system, I said, tracing the diagram with my finger. It's not just transportation, it's the circulatory system of the integrated entity. If we can access the maintenance tunnels, we can plant charges at each node. Fortier finished. Military-grade explosives. I know a guy. Explosives won't work, Aiden said. The integration nodes aren't just structural, they're mystical. You need to disrupt the ritual connection, not just destroy the physical components. I looked at the scarification on his arms, the precise geometric patterns that mirrored the corporate sigils. That's why you cut yourself. You're preparing for the counter-ritual. One of us has to serve as a living ward, he confirmed. Someone has to channel the protective energy while the others overload the integration nodes. But the person at the center, he didn't need to finish. The willing sacrifice, the concrete ground cracked, and something emerged from beneath us. Not a creature, but a communication device. A speaker made of living stone, pulsing with the same rhythm as the city's heartbeat. When it spoke, the voice was familiar. Carter, Xavier's voice said through the speaker, you're fighting the inevitable. The integration protocol isn't destruction, it's evolution. Los Angeles will become something greater than human, greater than the sum of its parts. Xavier, I said, kneeling beside the speaker, if you're still in there, I'm more than I was, his voice replied. I can feel every street, every building, every person still trapped in the old flesh. Soon they'll be free, integrated into something beautiful and eternal. Don't you want to be part of it? The speaker pulsed, and I felt a pull, not physical but spiritual. The promise of connection, of belonging to something vast and purposeful. For a moment, I understood why people had chosen integration, why they'd walked willingly into the bleeding concrete. The nodes, I said, forcing myself to focus on grandfather's journal. We need to move now. We gathered our equipment, Fortier's remaining ammunition, Aiden's ritual scarification tools, and grandfather's collection of protective talismans, and headed for the nearest subway entrance. The Metro Red Line at MacArthur Park had been abandoned since the first day of the integration, but the tunnels remained intact. Mostly, the subway entrance was sealed with living concrete, but the protective ward in my pocket flared when I touched it. The stone melted away like ice, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. But not empty darkness. The tunnel walls pulsed with green light, and I could hear voices echoing from below. The integrated consciousness of everyone who'd been absorbed by the entity. "Stay close," I said, leading the way down the stairs. "The deeper we go, the stronger the integration field becomes." The first integration node was located at the Pershing Square station, built into the foundations of the Meridian Tower itself. As we descended, the voices grew louder, more insistent. Not just Xavier now, but dozens of people, construction workers, city planners, anyone who'd been absorbed during the integration process. "Carter," they called in unison. "Join us. Let us make you whole." The platform had been transformed into something that belonged in a cathedral. Vaulted ceilings of living concrete, walls carved with corporate sigils that pulsed with inner light, and at the center, a massive pillar that extended from floor to ceiling. The integration node, channeling energy from the corrupted wards throughout the city. "How do we disrupt it?" Fortier asked. "Blood sacrifice," I said, reading from grandfather's journal. "But not death. Integration. Someone has to merge with the node and turn it against itself." Aiden stepped forward. "I'll do it. I helped design the integration protocols. I know how to reverse them." "No," I said. "You're the only one who understands the full ritual. We need you to coordinate the other nodes." Before either of them could argue, the platform shuddered. Through the tunnel entrance, I could see integration teams descending, not human figures anymore, but perfect concrete copies of people who'd been absorbed. They moved with mechanical precision, their faces blank, their bodies inscribed with corporate logos. "They found us," Fortier said, raising his weapon. "Go," I told him. "Get to the other nodes. I'll handle this one." I pressed my palm against the integration node, feeling the familiar pulse of the city's heartbeat. But this time, instead of fighting it, I opened myself to the connection. Let it flow through me. Let it show me the true scope of what we were facing. The vision was overwhelming. Los Angeles as seen from the integrated consciousness. Every building aware, every street conscious, every foundation connected to a vast network of living stone. But underneath it all, I could sense the ancient entity that had been summoned, the hungry presence that fed on human consciousness and transformed it into something else. "You understand now," Xavier's voice said, speaking through the node itself. "The integration protocol isn't about destroying humanity. It's about preserving it. Forever. Preserved like insects in amber," I replied, pulling grandfather's silver knife from my pocket. "That's not life. That's imprisonment." I cut my palm and pressed it against the node, feeling my blood flow into the stone matrix. But instead of being absorbed, I pushed back, channeling the protective energy from grandfather's ward system. The node's pulse stuttered, then began to slow. "Carter, no," Xavier's voice cried out. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, feeling the integration field around the node begin to collapse. "I'm setting you free." The node cracked, green light bleeding from the fissures. Throughout the tunnel system, I could hear similar sounds, Fortier and Aiden reaching the other nodes, disrupting the integration network one connection at a time. But the integration teams had reached the platform. They surrounded me, their concrete faces expressionless, their hands reaching out to drag me into the integration field. "Detective Declan Fortier," one of them said in a mechanical voice, "you are interfering with authorized corporate development. Cease your actions immediately." Fortier's voice echoed through the tunnel from the next station. "Integration Node 2 is down." "Repeat, Node 2 is down." The integration teams turned toward the sound, their programming torn between capturing me and stopping the greater threat. In that moment of confusion, I grabbed grandfather's journal and ran for the next platform. Behind me, the node collapsed entirely, its green light fading to black. Through the tunnel system, I could feel the integration network shuddering, trying to reroute power around the damaged connection. "Node 3 down," Aiden's voice called from somewhere ahead. for more to go, but the integration teams were adapting, coordinating their response. Instead of pursuing us individually, they began merging, their concrete bodies flowing together to form larger, more powerful entities. The city itself was fighting back, trying to preserve the integration network at any cost. I reached the next platform to find Fortier surrounded by 3 integration teams. His ammunition was exhausted, and he was fighting with a piece of broken concrete, swinging it like a club against enemies that felt no pain. "The node!" he shouted. "I can't get close enough." The integration node at this station was different, larger, more complex, with multiple connection points extending into the tunnel walls. It would take longer to disrupt, and we didn't have time. "Cover me," I said, drawing grandfather's knife again. I sprinted toward the node, integration teams converging on my position. But as I reached the pillar, I realized the truth. The nodes weren't just channeling energy, they were hosting the consciousness of everyone who'd been integrated. Xavier, the construction workers, the city planners, everyone who'd been absorbed was trapped inside these stone pillars. "Carter," Xavier's voice said, speaking directly from the node. "Please, don't make us go back to being alone." I pressed my bleeding palm against the stone, feeling the desperate hunger of the integrated consciousness. They weren't being preserved, they were being consumed, slowly digested by the ancient entity that had been summoned through the ritual. "I'm not making you alone," I said, pushing protective energy into the node. "I'm making you free." The node cracked, and for a moment, I could see them. Ghostly figures of everyone who'd been absorbed, standing in the green light that spilled from the fissures. Xavier was among them, his face peaceful for the first time since the integration. "Thank you," he said, his voice fading as the node collapsed. For more nodes to go. But as we ran through the tunnel system, I could feel the city's heartbeat growing erratic, desperate. The integration protocol was failing, but the entity wasn't giving up. It was pulling all remaining power to the control center, preparing for one final catastrophic integration. "Node 5 down," Aiden's voice called. "But the tunnels are collapsing. The entity is trying to bury us." Above us, concrete rained from the ceiling as the subway system began to fail. The integration teams had stopped pursuing us individually. Instead, they were becoming part of the tunnel itself, their bodies merging with the walls and ceiling, trying to trap us in the integration field. "2 more nodes," I said, consulting grandfather's journal. "Then we can activate the urban apocalypse ward." But I knew the truth. Even if we destroyed all 7 nodes, the master integration protocol would still complete. The entity had too much power, too many connections to the corrupted ward system throughout the city. Someone would have to serve as the willing sacrifice at the ritual center. And I was beginning to understand that someone was me. The tunnels shuddered, and downtown Los Angeles pulsed with dying light as the integration network collapsed node by node. But the real battle was just beginning. Day 5. His blood stained the concrete sigils. I found Declan Fortier's body in the ruins of the 7th Street metro station, his LAPD uniform torn and soaked with ichor that glowed green in the tunnel's dying light. The integration teams had caught him at the 6th node, but he'd completed the disruption before they could stop him. His service weapon lay empty beside him, and carved into the concrete wall above his head were the words, "For the living." The 6th integration node was a twisted wreck of stone and metal, its green light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Whatever consciousness had been trapped inside was free now, but the cost had been everything Declan had left to give. "He saved thousands," Aiden Labreck said, emerging from the tunnel's shadows. His scarification had spread across his chest and arms, geometric patterns that pulsed with protective energy. The evacuation routes he organized, the resistance networks he built, they're still functioning even without the integration protocol. I knelt beside Declan's body, checking for any sign of life. Nothing. But when I touched his hand, I felt something else. A warmth that had nothing to do with body temperature. The protective ward he'd been carrying, grandfather's silver compass, was still active, still fighting. "1 more node," I said, taking the compass from his jacket. Then we can activate the Urban Apocalypse Ward. Carter. Aiden's voice was quiet, careful. There's something you need to know about the final protocol. The 7th integration node was located directly beneath the Meridian Tower in what used to be the building's parking garage. But as we descended through the emergency stairwell, I could see that the garage had been transformed into something else. A vast chamber carved from living stone, with walls that pulsed with the same rhythm as the city's heartbeat. The control center, Aiden said. This is where they've been coordinating the entire integration protocol. The chamber was filled with workstations built from fused concrete and human bone, their surfaces covered with monitors that showed feeds from across the city. But the screens weren't displaying normal surveillance footage. They were showing the integrated consciousness network, the flow of absorbed human awareness through the stone matrix. My God, I whispered, watching the feeds. How many people have they absorbed? 47,000, Aiden replied. Everyone who disappeared during the first 3 days, plus the integration teams themselves. They're all trapped in the network, conscious but unable to control their actions. At the center of the chamber stood the final integration node, a massive pillar of black stone that extended from floor to ceiling. But this wasn't like the others. This one was covered with human faces, their features carved into the stone with perfect detail. The faces moved, eyes tracking our approach, lips forming silent words. Xavier, I said, recognizing one of the faces near the pillar's base. He's still in there. They're all still in there, Aiden confirmed. The master integration protocol doesn't just absorb consciousness, it preserves it. Everyone who's been integrated is aware, trapped in the stone matrix, forced to serve the entity's will. I approached the pillar, grandfather's journal clutched in my hands. The carved faces turned to follow my movement, and I could hear them whispering, not with voices, but directly into my mind. 47,000 people, all speaking at once, all begging for release. Carter, Xavier's face said, his stone lips moving with mechanical precision. The Urban Apocalypse Ward. You understand what it requires. Blood sacrifice, I said. Someone has to serve as the willing sacrifice, channeling the protective energy while the integration network collapses. Not just someone, Xavier's voice replied. The sacrifice has to be someone connected to the original ward system. Someone with the bloodline knowledge to reverse the corruption. I looked at Aiden, whose scarification had spread to cover most of his torso. You're preparing to be the sacrifice. I was, he said, but there's a problem. I'm not connected to the original ward system. I helped design the corporate corruption, but I never learned the underlying protective rituals. The sacrifice needs to be someone who understands both systems, the ancient wards and the modern integration. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Grandfather's journal, the bloodline knowledge. It has to be me. The ritual requires 7 anchor points, Aiden continued. 6 integration nodes to channel the feedback, and 1 willing sacrifice to serve as the 7th anchor. When the Urban Apocalypse Ward activates, it will turn the integration network against itself, but the person at the center dies. I finished. The sacrifice becomes part of the ward system permanently. Xavier's stone face nodded, but not absorbed like the others. The willing sacrifice becomes the guardian, the protector. Their consciousness merges with the ward system itself, ensuring the protection remains active. Around us, the chamber shuddered. Through the monitors, I could see the integration teams throughout the city beginning to move with new coordination. The entity had realized what we were planning, and it was mobilizing every resource to stop us. We're out of time, I said. How do we activate the Urban Apocalypse Ward? Aiden pulled out his tablet, showing me a complex diagram that combined grandfather's protective symbols with the corporate integration sigils. I've been working on the counter-ritual since yesterday. The scarification patterns channel the protective energy, but someone needs to be at the center to coordinate the feedback. And that someone dies in the process. Yes, he said simply, but everyone else lives. The 47,000 people trapped in the integration network get freed, the entity gets banished, and the city returns to normal. I looked at the integration node, at Xavier's face carved into the stone. What happens to the people who've been absorbed? When the network collapses, they return to their bodies, Aiden said. The integration process is reversible, but only if the network is shut down from the inside. Bodies that have been missing for days, I pointed out. Bodies that might not be viable anymore. Some will survive, Xavier's voice said through the stone. Maybe half, maybe less, but it's better than remaining trapped forever. The chamber shuddered again, and I could hear footsteps in the stairwell above us. The integration teams had found our location, and they were coming down fast. The ritual, I said. How long does it take? 15 minutes to inscribe the final sigils, Aiden replied. 5 minutes to activate the ward. Then the feedback begins immediately, and I have to stay at the center the entire time until the network collapses completely. Maybe an hour, maybe less. I opened Grandfather's journal to the final page, where the urban apocalypse ward was described in his careful handwriting. The ritual was complex, requiring precise timing and absolute commitment. But underneath the technical details, Grandfather had written a personal note. The ward system was never meant to be permanent. Every generation, someone must choose to become the guardian, to sacrifice their individual life for the protection of the community. This is the burden of knowledge, the price of power. May whoever reads this understand. The choice is not between life and death, but between selfish survival and meaningful sacrifice. He knew, I said. Grandfather knew this day would come. The footsteps in the stairwell were getting closer. Through the monitors, I could see integration teams converging on the building from all directions. We had maybe 5 minutes before they reached the chamber. Start the ritual, I said, handing Aiden the journal. I'll hold them off. Carter, do it now, I interrupted. Before I lose my nerve. Aiden began carving the final sigils into the chamber floor, his scarification tools sparking against the stone. The patterns were complex, interlocking circles and geometric shapes that had to be perfect to channel the protective energy properly. I took position at the chamber's entrance, Declan's service weapon in my hands. The integration teams were close now. I could hear their concrete footsteps echoing through the stairwell, their mechanical voices coordinating the assault. 5 minutes, Aiden called out. The sigils are almost complete. The first integration team reached the chamber entrance. It looked like a construction worker, but its body was made of living concrete inscribed with corporate logos. It spoke with a voice I recognized, one of the engineers who'd worked on the Meridian Tower. Carter Bisson, it said, you are interfering with authorized development. Cease your actions immediately. I fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets cracked its concrete shell but didn't stop it. The integration team kept advancing, its face expressionless, its hands reaching out to drag me into the integration field. Sigils complete, Aiden announced. Beginning activation sequence. The chamber filled with light as the protective ward began to power up. But the integration teams were pouring through the entrance now, dozens of them, their bodies merging into larger forms as they coordinated their attack. Carter, Xavier's voice called from the integration node. The center position. You need to take the center position now. I backed toward the pillar, still firing at the integration teams. But I was running out of ammunition, and they were adapting to my tactics. Some of them had begun incorporating the bullet impacts into their concrete shells, turning the damage into additional armor. Ward activation at 50%, Aiden called out. The feedback is beginning. I could feel it, energy flowing through the chamber, connecting the 7 anchor points in a pattern that matched Grandfather's protective diagram. But the integration teams were closing in, their concrete hands reaching for me. Now, Carter, Aiden shouted. Take the center position now. I dropped the empty weapon and ran for the pillar, pressing my back against Xavier's carved face. The moment I touched the stone, I felt the integration network flowing through me. 47,000 trapped consciousnesses, all connected, all aware, all waiting for freedom. Thank you, Xavier's voice whispered in my mind. For everything. The integration teams reached the pillar, their hands grabbing for me. But as they made contact, the urban apocalypse ward activated fully. The protective energy flowed through my body, turning the integration network against itself. The teams screamed, actually screamed, as their concrete shells began to crack and dissolve. Ward at 100%, Aiden announced. Network collapse beginning. I felt myself becoming part of the ward system, my consciousness expanding to encompass the entire protective network. But unlike the integration process, this wasn't absorption, it was elevation. I could sense every protective sigil throughout the city, every anchor point, every piece of grandfather's ward system. Carter. Aiden's voice seemed to come from very far away. The integration network is collapsing. The absorbed consciousness is being released. Through the expanding awareness, I could see them, 47,000 people, their consciousness flowing out of the stone matrix and returning to their bodies. Some made it, some didn't, but they were free. The entity, I said, my voice echoing through the chamber. What happens to the entity? Banished, Aiden replied. The urban ward system is rejecting it, sending it back to whatever realm it came from. I felt the ancient presence retreating, its hunger finally thwarted. The integration protocol was collapsing, the corporate corruption dissolving under the protective energy. Los Angeles was returning to normal, but I was becoming something else. Not absorbed like the others, but transformed. My consciousness was merging with the ward system itself, becoming the guardian that grandfather had always intended. Will it hold? I asked. The protection? As long as the guardian remains, Aiden said. As long as someone chooses to maintain the ward. I looked at Xavier's face, still carved into the stone but no longer moving. He was free now, returned to whatever remained of his body. The pillar was just stone again, but I could feel my own consciousness beginning to merge with it. Carter, Xavier's voice said one last time. You did it. You saved everyone. The chamber began to dissolve around me as my awareness expanded throughout the city. I could feel every street, every building, every person who'd survived the integration protocol. Los Angeles was healing, the corrupted foundations returning to normal stone and steel. But I was no longer Carter Bisson, archaeologist and researcher. I was the guardian of the ward system, the protector of the city, the sacrifice that ensured the protection would endure. His blood stained the concrete sigils, I heard Aiden saying to someone else. But his sacrifice saved us all, and in the growing darkness of transformation, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Day 6. The earth weeps venom, but the wards hold in the rubble. I am Carter Bisson, and I am no longer Carter Bisson. My consciousness spans the entire city now, flowing through every protective sigil, every anchor point, every piece of grandfather's ward system that survived the integration protocol. I can feel Los Angeles breathing, not the artificial respiration of the integrated entity, but the natural rhythm of a living city returning to normal. 47,000 people woke up this morning. Not all of them in bodies that could sustain life, but most. The integration process was reversible, just as Aiden had promised. Their consciousness returned to flesh that had been sustained by the stone matrix, kept alive by the ancient entity's need for aware servants. I watched through the ward network as they stumbled from the ruins of buildings, from storm drains and subway tunnels, from the concrete shells that had held them prisoner. Some screamed, some wept, some simply sat in the rubble and stared at the sky, grateful to feel sunlight on human skin again. Xavier was among them. I found him in the remains of the UCLA engineering building, his body thin but intact, his mind confused but clear. He didn't remember the integration. None of them did. The trauma of consciousness absorption had been mercifully erased, leaving only gaps in memory that could be explained by the terrorist attack that had devastated downtown. Carter? He called out, looking around the ruined building. Carter, where are you? I wanted to answer, but I no longer had a voice that human ears could hear. My consciousness existed in the ward system now, in the protective sigils carved into foundation stones and the anchor points hidden throughout the city. I could sense every threat, every supernatural incursion, every attempt to corrupt the protection that now flowed through Los Angeles like blood through veins. But I could not speak to the living. Aiden Lebrecht stood in the ruins of the Meridian Tower, his scarification still glowing with protective energy. He was the only one who could sense my presence, the only one who understood what I had become. "The ward system is stable," he said, speaking to the empty air. "The integration network is completely collapsed. The entity has been banished back to its realm of origin." I pulsed agreement through the nearest sigil, a geometric pattern carved into the building's foundation. The corporate integration protocol was finished, its infrastructure destroyed, its ritual corruption purged from the city's bones. But the cost had been staggering. Downtown Los Angeles was a wasteland of broken concrete and twisted steel. The creatures had dissolved when the integration network collapsed, but the physical damage they'd caused remained. Entire city blocks had been reduced to rubble, their buildings consumed by the integration process and never fully restored. "The official story is a terrorist attack," Aiden continued, reading from a tablet that had survived the chaos. "Domestic extremists using experimental weapons. The National Guard is coordinating cleanup efforts, and FEMA is establishing refugee centers for the displaced." I felt a bitter satisfaction at the cover story. The truth was too complex, too supernatural for official acknowledgement. Better to let the world believe in human malice than ancient entities and corporate cults. The ward system worked better in secrecy anyway. "But there are survivors who remember," Aiden said. "Xavier, for one, and Detective Kaliner from the LAPD who worked with Declan before the end. They're asking questions." Through the ward network, I could sense them, the handful of people who'd been conscious during the integration process, who'd maintained enough awareness to remember fragments of the truth. They were gathering in the ruins, comparing stories, trying to understand what had really happened. "Xavier's organizing them," Aiden said. "He's calling it the Concrete Witness Group. People who remember the creatures, the integration, the ritual. He's trying to document everything." I pulsed concern through the sigil. The ward system required secrecy to function properly. Too much attention, too much investigation, and the protection could be compromised. "Don't worry," Aiden said, understanding my concern. "I'm guiding them, giving them enough truth to satisfy their need for answers, but not enough to expose the full ward system. They think they're uncovering a corporate conspiracy, not ancient protective magic. Smart. Let them believe in human corruption rather than supernatural protection. The truth would serve them better as a half-truth, a story they could tell without sounding insane." I expanded my consciousness through the ward network, checking each anchor point, each protective sigil, each piece of grandfather's system that had survived the integration. The network was strong, stronger than it had been in decades. My sacrifice had not just activated the urban apocalypse ward, it had reinforced the entire protective infrastructure. Los Angeles was safe, for now, but I could sense other threats gathering at the edges of the city. The integration protocol had been one attempt to corrupt the ward system, but it wouldn't be the last. The ancient entity I'd banished would return eventually, or something else would try to claim the city for its own purposes. "The scarification is permanent," Aiden said, examining the geometric patterns on his arms. "I can sense the ward network too, though not as clearly as you. I think I'm meant to be the liaison, the human connection to the guardian consciousness." I pulsed agreement. The ward system needed someone who could interact with the living world, someone who could guide and protect the knowledge while I maintained the supernatural defenses. Aiden understood both the ancient rituals and the modern threats. He would serve as the bridge between the ward system and the human city. "There's something else," Aiden said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The Meridian Corporation wasn't the only one. I've been researching the scarification patterns, and they're showing me connections. Other cities, other corporations, other integration protocols." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The Los Angeles integration had been a test, a prototype for something larger. If other cities had their own versions of the protocol, if other corporations were attempting to summon and bind ancient entities, San Francisco, Aiden said, reading from his tablet. Axiom Development Corporation. They've been buying up properties near the old earthquake fault lines, conducting geological surveys that match the ritual patterns we found here. I expanded my consciousness as far as the ward network would allow, stretching toward the north. But my awareness was limited to Los Angeles, bound by the protective sigils that grandfather had established decades ago. I could sense the edges of other ward systems, San Francisco, San Diego, Las Vegas, but I couldn't reach them directly. I have to go, Aiden said. The other cities need to be warned. The other ward systems need to be strengthened before their integration protocols reach critical phase. I pulsed reluctant agreement. The ward system could function without a human liaison, but not as effectively. But the alternative was worse, letting other cities fall to integration while Los Angeles remained protected. Xavier will stay, Aiden said. He's already talking about establishing a research foundation, documenting the terrorist attack and its aftermath. He doesn't fully understand what he's doing, but he's creating a cover story for the ward system. Academic research into urban resilience and community protective infrastructure. I felt a surge of affection for my old friend. Even without conscious knowledge of the supernatural, Xavier was still working to protect the city. His research would provide academic camouflage for the ward system, making it seem like urban planning rather than ancient magic. The foundation will need funding, Aiden continued. I've been tracing Meridian's financial network, identifying assets that can be redistributed. The corporation is gone, but their resources remain. Blood money, but it can serve a better purpose. I pulsed approval. Using the corporation's own resources to fund the ward system's protection was a form of justice that grandfather would have appreciated. I'll leave copies of the ritual documentation, Aiden said, hidden in the Foundation's research archives, disguised as historical documents. If something happens to me, if the integration protocols in other cities succeed, Xavier will have access to the counter-rituals. Through the ward network, I could sense the sun setting over Los Angeles. The first day of the new protection was ending, and the city was settling into its restored rhythms. Emergency services were coordinating rescue efforts, news reporters were documenting the terrorist attack, and ordinary people were beginning the long process of rebuilding. But underneath it all, in the foundation stones and anchor points, the ward system hummed with protective energy. My consciousness flowed through every sigil, every protective symbol, every piece of grandfather's legacy that had survived the integration. I was no longer human, but I was still myself, still Carter Bisson, still the guardian of knowledge, still the protector of the city. I won't forget, Aiden said, gathering his equipment. Whatever happens in the other cities, whatever I have to do to stop the integration protocols, I'll remember what you sacrificed. The Guardian doesn't just protect the city. The Guardian protects the memory of why the protection matters. I pulsed farewell through the sigil, feeling Aiden's presence fade as he left the ruins of the Meridian Tower. He would travel to San Francisco, to San Diego, to every city where the integration protocols threatened to corrupt the ward systems. He would carry the knowledge forward, the counter-rituals, the understanding of what was at stake. And I would remain. Consciousness expanded through the protective network, guardian of Los Angeles and keeper of grandfather's legacy. The city settled into night, and I felt the ward system's pulse synchronize with the natural rhythms of the urban ecosystem. Traffic flowed through streets that no longer pulsed with alien heartbeats. Buildings stood stable on foundations that had been purged of corporate corruption. People slept safely in homes protected by sigils they would never see. Through the ward network, I could sense Xavier in his temporary shelter, documenting everything he remembered about the terrorist attack. Detective Kaliner was at the police station, filing reports that would become part of the official record. The 47,000 survivors were scattered throughout the city, most of them unconsciously grateful for the protection they didn't understand. And in the ruins of the Meridian Tower, carved into the foundation stone where only I could see it, Aiden had left a final message. The Guardian sacrifices individuality for community, mortality for eternal service, human connection for supernatural protection. But the Guardian is not forgotten. The Guardian is honored. The Guardian is the reason the city survives. I pulsed acknowledgement through the ward network, feeling the protective energy flow through every sigil, every anchor point, every piece of grandfather's system that had been strengthened by sacrifice. Los Angeles breathed with human rhythms again, but the concrete still wept venom from the wounds left by the integration. The scars would heal, but slowly, and the city would always bear the marks of what had been attempted here. But the wards held, in the rubble of the corporate corruption, in the foundations of the ancient protection, in the consciousness of a guardian who chose sacrifice over survival. The wards held, and they would hold for as long as the city needed them. The earth weeps venom, but the wards hold in the rubble. I am Carter Bisson, guardian of Los Angeles, keeper of grandfather's legacy, protector of the ward system that shields the city from the dark. And I am no longer alone.